Welcome, everyone. Hello, my name is Dr. Michelle Otstadt. They call me Mo here, and I'm an assistant principal. I was an assistant principal. I'm an assistant professor here at UAGC. I am your host today for this session, and our session is called Meeting the Needs of Open Access Doctoral Students. By joining us today, you acknowledge that this session is being recorded and will be shared with our TLC-related materials. Your microphones will be muted for the presentation, but we encourage you to post any of the questions and comments in the chat for Heather. Also, we've enabled live transcriptions, and if you would like to use it, just click on the transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And now, I'm pleased to present to you Dr. Heather Pederson, who is an associate professor here at University of Arizona Global Campus. Dr. Pederson has been teaching online doctoral classes in open access, low bar, universities for almost 20 years and currently teaches in the Doctor of Psychology program. She spends most of her time supporting students who are preparing for and completing their applied doctoral project. Please welcome Heather. Heather, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mo. I'm really happy to see so many familiar faces and names I see popping in. Those of you who know me, I was just telling the gals before we started that it's really hard to condense all of this down into 20 minutes because we could really talk about this for days. And in many of our meetings, whether they're informal or formal faculty meetings, we often talk about how can we best meet the needs of our students, and we know we have a very unique population. So I think okay, I'm trying to change this. There we go. I think today we're going to give more of a high overview. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done in my classrooms where I have found success in supporting our open access doctoral learners. It seems crazy to me that I really have been teaching in these types of programs for over 19 years, almost 20 years. And I feel like that's, it's not necessarily almost from the beginning, but it feels like it's pretty darn close. So I offer this slide as just a little bit of background information. And of course, you can see online learning, not online learning as you and I know it, but online learning emerged slowly in the 60s, which is so long ago, but the University of Hawaii offered a remote learning experience. Of course, it wasn't with the internet as we now, but it was of network computer terminals. And there's some differing information about this, but I have 1985 as possibly the first online degree program offered by National Technological University. And this slide up here on the right, to me, really drives home the fact that we need to keep having these conversations because we have nearly half of all So it's really critical that faculty go beyond just teaching, and we do a bunch of other things to ensure that we're not just talking at students and typing on a discussion board. And you're going to notice throughout the presentation that the community of inquiry framework is threaded through. And if you were to read the book chapter that this is kind of based on, you'll realize that it's threaded all the way through. It's really well known that it doesn't matter what type of online student we have, the online classroom can really cause students to feel isolated and unsupported. And even as faculty, you know the feeling where sometimes working from home in a home office alone, not with your colleagues, we can even get that feeling of isolation. So can you imagine going into a classroom where you don't know anyone else, you don't know your classmates, you don't know the content, you're not the expert in the content, you don't know your faculty member. So we do all of these asynchronous discussion boards. digitally submitted assignments. These students don't ever see the instructor or classmates face to face. So it makes for a really impersonal learning experience. We really need to know as instructors how to effectively connect with these students and build caring, authentic relationships. And that can be really challenging in the virtual environment. So taking it a step further, we're not just talking generally about online students, although many of the strategies that we'll discuss during the presentation really could apply to any type of online student. We're talking about open students who attend UAGC and other types of universities where there's a lesser path of resistance for admissions purposes. And we know that oftentimes these students are from marginalized populations and underserved communities. They have histories, sometimes unimaginable histories of violence, trauma, poverty, incarceration, and oftentimes have faced systemic barriers, one or more, or even many systemic barriers. I know I find it fascinating when I talk to some of my own students, just the sheer grit and determination that they're continuing at this doctoral level, the highest degree you can possibly earn. And they tell me a little bit about their family and their other personal and professional experiences. And they deserve a lot of credit for wanting to pursue this. And I love the fact that we and many other universities actually give them the opportunity. We open the door and we say, yep, come on in. We're going to support you. We are going to have very specific supports in place for you. We're going to provide the flexibility you need and walk with you step by step through the process. So the struggle is real. And what I have on this slide, probably we can relate to one or more of these photos. I oftentimes joke that could be us as faculty, right? Working from home in a remote office with kids around the table, or you are trying to multitask. But this really could be an image of any of our students. Adult learners, multiple responsibilities. They have other things going on in their lives besides just school. Almost all of them have families and have jobs and other obligations. So for me, I don't ever want my students to feel like the people in these photos feel. And so I take certain steps to try to prevent that from happening. Is it 100% preventable? No. But when I do have a student and I can get that vibe through email or text or whatever it may be that they may look like this, that's when we need to jump in and help out. So our open access doctoral students in particular have very specific needs. You know, I've been doing this for almost 2 decades, and every term I teach, I learn something else. I learn how to do something better, and I figure out what's not working and what is working and kind of add to my toolbox. So first and foremost, from the instructor, we are really, really important to their educational experience. It goes way beyond the content of any of our courses. So from the instructor, they need empathy, caring, understanding, trust, honesty, and flexibility. That seems common sense, right? We all need that. But it's very difficult sometimes to provide that in a virtual environment where you really aren't in synchronous meetings. You don't really have to see them or hear them at all unless you make it so. They also need authentic relationships with instructors and classmates, and they need to feel a sense of belonging. So in the chat, I would like you to just type 1 or 2, if you are an instructor, what are the specific needs of your students? So you have students in probably a wide variety of content classes. Just briefly, what are the specific needs of your students? I just want to kind of see. Flexibility and compassion, absolutely. And sometimes when these courses move so quickly, that flexibility piece can be challenging. I teach a course, as do a couple other people in here, where each week absolutely builds on the previous week. And you can't do the week 3 assignment unless you've done week 1 and week 2. And so if you hit week 3 and they say, oh, you know, I had this come up, I need a week extension, you know, I'm going to give that extension and provide that flexibility, but I also have to remind them, this is only a 9-week course and you really can't just jump ahead a week. You're going to have to wait for my feedback. So it makes it a bit more of a struggle. Let's see, reading through the chat. Doctoral students, exactly as you mentioned, need the authentic relationships to support them. Absolutely. Because doctoral students have greater academic experience, there's a perception that these needs aren't as necessary. Empathy, yes, and that came from Dr. Nikki Campbell, who was my student. She graduated with her PhD and walked in graduation in May, and she and I actually worked through a lot of these things because she and I would do Zoom meetings all the time. So yeah, all of these things are what we see. Authenticity, yes. Working with associate faculty, trust, honesty, and empathy. Faculty struggle with the same issues, 100%. Communication, be flexible, support them as needed. And it's sometimes difficult to know what is needed because if they don't tell you, you don't know. So that whole communication and connection piece is really, really important. So we know that online students, you know, go about the content and meeting people differently, but these open access doctoral students definitely have very specific needs that need to be met. All right, so meeting the needs by weaving threads. So we have these kind of, I like to call them like pillars, where all of these things have to be threaded together. You don't just do 1 or 2 or 3. Students need all of these things, and it can be a little bit tricky because you are dealing with many different personalities, many different backgrounds, but you can learn to do some of the same things that have been shown to work. We know that technology, obviously that's the #1 thing. You have to be able to use the technology, but the way in which the instructor engages and communicates with the student is equally, if not more so, critical than the technology itself. As I said before, online students oftentimes feel isolated and insecure. They're doing a whole lot of reading and writing, but they are never physically present with us or their classmates. And so that's a really big shift. Whenever I teach the in-res, I tell students it would be so lovely if we could be sitting in our small conference room together. I said the last in-res was right before COVID in person. We were in San Diego, and I remember that group vividly. I am still in communication. There were 12 students. We would get our coffee in the morning. We would sit in a little horseshoe or a round circle, and we would have conversations. Not only conversations about their potential ADP topic or approach. Yes, all of that is important, but we really got to know each other. We would break for lunch, and some of us would go have lunch together. Same with dinner. And we were with each other for 3 days, and we were really able to form a community of learners and make those connections. Doing that in a virtual setting is much more difficult. So they're never physically present with us. There's 0 in-person meetings. You can talk on the phone. It's not quite the same as talking to someone face to face. But making these connections really does require the instructor to have a consistent and intentional effort and a high degree of flexibility and kind of like I said, a toolbox, a variety of communication strategies. Email is great and it's quick, but how many times have you received an email or even a text from someone and you've misinterpreted it because it's really hard to portray tone? through the written language. I try to use, I know it seems silly, but I try to use emojis. Even on my discussion boards, I will try to put a smiley face because it's really hard to write a paragraph and put emotion into that. So there are some different strategies that we could use. Open access students also sometimes experience imposter syndrome. So they didn't have to take the GRE to get in here. And then they get into these really high level classes. And I hear it all the time. I have a student who's going to be doing her ADP on imposter syndrome. And they're not quite sure if they've made the right decision for themselves. They're not very sure that they belong or that they have the ability to complete. So they also sometimes lack that support of family and friends. Sometimes I've heard from students that they have family members that say, really, you already have your master's degree. Do you have to show us up with a doctorate degree? And I'm appalled by that. I can't believe a family member would say that to another family member, but it does happen. There are also instances of jealousy where we have students in these doctoral programs, and now all of a sudden the spouse or a friend or a family member is actually jealous that they've taken these next steps. So others are working through trauma and other types of barriers. So as you can see, open access students really bring a huge variety of experiences and feelings to the table. So it's really critical to ensure that the way we communicate with them is inclusive, that it's safe. We always need to make sure, no matter which university you're at, that we follow the diversity, equity, and inclusive best practices and policies that the institution sets forth. It's just critical. Building trust with our online students really does require creating a psychologically and emotionally safe atmosphere. Those words, psychologically safe, are relatively new to me, and they now hold a lot of meaning to me because it's kind of what we've been trying to do through the years. I have a student who's working on an ADP. He is the lead of a wellness department at a large organization, and he's doing his ADP on creating a psychologically safe work environment. So he's going to be doing some workshops. So I kind of picked his brain and I said, psychologically safe, what does that mean? Well, he started talking about the committee of inquiry and all of these things applied. And I'm like, I never knew it had a name, but it does. It's psychologically safe. So I found that really interesting. And I'm actually considering being his chair when he finishes out his planning courses, because I am really curious learning more about that. So when we are trying to cultivate these authentic, trusting relationships with our students, it really does require a personalized approach. No two students are the same. They bring their own unique perspectives, their own unique experiences and goals. So it takes a lot of effort. The courses I teach are to 10 minutes. That may not sound like very many, but in these courses, meeting with my via Zoom, all of them every week. I don't know, I broke up a little bit. It said the connection was unstable. I saw that. Is everything okay? Okay, great. So sometimes students have a misconception, or early on in the class, you may provide some feedback and they don't like it or they don't understand it. And then all of a sudden, you receive about 15 emails over the course of an hour because they're really upset, they're really mad, they're really angry. Oftentimes that stems from a misunderstanding. So in my experience, I have found that by quickly sending an email or a text and saying, hey, can we meet via Zoom real quickly? I'll leave it open, jump on when you can. In less than 5 minutes, that situation can be de-escalated, put to the side, we're moving forward. Those students need to see me. They need to see me smile. They need to know I'm not mad at you. They need to know that I'm coming from a place of care and concern. And they need to hear my tone of voice. and then they need me to explain maybe what I wrote to them that maybe I didn't do a great job communicating it to them, or maybe they completely misinterpreted what I was trying to say. So de-escalating those things by a quick Zoom where they can hear you and see you is absolutely critical. So another kind of pro tip, when you are trying to make these authentic connections in the classroom, I always jot down something from their introduction. And I just like put it on a little piece of paper. I guess you could do it digitally if you wanted to. And just to make those connections, I will always circle back within the first 3 weeks with something about what they wrote in their introduction. A couple of examples. This spring, I had a student, she was really excited. Her daughter was going to be doing 8th grade graduation. She's like, oh, I'm so busy. We're having a party and we're going to do this and this. And about a week later, 10 days, I sent her a message and I said, hey, how was the 8th grade graduation? Well, she wrote back about 5 paragraphs and explained it all and was so thrilled that I actually took 2 minutes of my time to ask about it. It was just really, really great. And that just showed her that I was concerned. It was very interesting. And, you know, we have a connection now. So there are definitely ways that you can connect. I do feel as though meeting with students during week 1 via Zoom is probably my #1 secret weapon. In my courses, one-to-one meetings the first week for my ADP students are mandatory. For all other courses, I just say that I highly, highly recommend it. And those who do show up are so happy that they did because we get to know each other outside of the classroom and we can just chit chat. And then I also hold a group meeting via Zoom, so they can talk to their classmates, and it isn't anything about class related stuff. It's just about life and experiences and interests. So as I mentioned, the community of inquiry framework, a lot of this is threaded all the way through. So it's your social presence, it's your teaching presence, and it's the cognitive presence. Students are not going to learn if they feel unsafe, if they feel excluded, if they feel hesitant, etc. So the community of inquiry framework, it's things that we do all the time. We just have a name for it. And these things are absolutely critical for fostering that community among the group. So I think it's just important to bring that back up. Oh, just closing the chat.
Heather, we are about 1:24, so just want to let you know where we are with time.
This is my final slide. So
Okay.
some of the things that we talked about is just really creating that sense of belonging through community and connection. They really need open access. Doctoral students need someone to reinforce that they can be successful and really just to believe in them. And thank you so much for those of you who attended. And do you have any questions for me? And I see lots of familiar names in the chat. So thank you to my people who I know and to those who I don't, and maybe we'll get to know. Thanks, Millie. Thanks, everyone.
Well, Heather, I really enjoyed hearing about your use of emojis to set the tone, because you're so correct. It does come across differently to different people. So thank you for sharing that tip.
Yeah, it seems silly. And, you know, some may say it's unprofessional, but I'm telling you, it works. And then they'll do it back.
Any other questions for Heather?
Thank you, everyone. And I will see you at the other sessions.